Hello, everyone. My name is Woo Jung-yup. I'm a director of the Center for American Studies at the Sejong Institute. I'm going to host a meeting with American colleagues and Korean colleagues about the impact of the US elections on the ROK-US alliance. For that, we have prominent speakers. I'm going to introduce them in an alphabetical order of their last name. We have Professor Jung Gu-yeon of Gangwon National University. We have Dr. Zach Cooper of AEI.
Hello.
We have Professor Jung Sung-chul of Myungji University. We have Professor Park Yoon-hee of Ewha Women's University. We have Dr. Dan Twining of IRI.
Great to be with you.
We have Ambassador Jo Yoon of USIP. I gave two questions in advance to our American speakers. How important is the foreign policy issue to the US elections, especially Korean Peninsula issues? And also, what will be the major differences you see between if President Trump or Vice President Biden is elected? So I'll ask Dr. Zach Cooper to go first for his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's great to see Korean friends. I wish we could all be in person, but it's wonderful to be able to at least talk with you over a video conference. So I will be very straightforward. My view is that Korea will not be a top issue in the US election. I think, unfortunately, that Korea has gotten a lot of attention the last couple of years, but many Americans feel that we haven't been able to move the ball forward. And so I think, as I'll discuss, there's not a lot of incentive for President Trump to talk about Korea at the moment. I think what we're entering into is now the third phase of US outreach to the Korean Peninsula over the Trump administration's time. I would call the first phase fire and fury. This was classically the phrase that the president used himself from roughly his inauguration in January 2017 into early 2018. The second phase I would call fire and flatter, where the administration attempted to get Kim Jong-un to actually come to the table. And Ambassador Yoon was a critical part of these negotiations. And that the core part of that time was really from June 2018 to June 2019. And then I think over the last year or so, we've seen a transition away from that strategy towards what I would call fire and forget. So I think the administration has put Korea on the back burner. The president has sort of given up on his ability to try and make a large deal with Kim Jong-un. And instead, he's gone and paid more attention, frankly, to other topics where he thought he could make more progress. And I think we'll just see that continue over the next 4 months. There are three reasons, in my view, that that's the case. The first is that this is a politically risky topic for President Trump. The revelations in John Bolton's recent book do not paint the president's outreach to North Korea in a particularly good light. It therefore is risky for him to bring it up just a few months ahead of an election. In addition, I think Trump will be distracted by the domestic challenges we're having in the United States right now. First, obviously, there are the economic challenges brought on by COVID-19, but also the resurgence that's happening right now in the United States of the virus. And then third, the social concerns that have we've been seeing in the protests that have been going on within the United States. And this is something the president has decided that he wants to talk about and make a central part of his platform. So I think he'll be more focused on domestic issues than international ones. And then lastly, it's just difficult for President Trump to travel over the next few months. He's got an election coming up. He's going to be very focused on going around the country to the extent that he can, trying to win votes for that election. I do not think it's going to be easy for him to travel outside of the United States. It's hard for me to imagine him having another summit with Kim Jong-un. And without that, I don't think he's going to want to focus on Korea. So I don't think Korea will play high on the list of topics for the election. That is not atypical. foreign policy issues are not usually what move the needle in American elections. But I do think we would see a very different policy potentially from Joe Biden and his team. The Biden team is very experienced on these issues. They have a deep bench. And so I think we could assume that they'll do three things differently. The first is a more conventional policy towards North Korea, likely focusing on trying to contain and deter North Korea as a first step, and then looking for avenues maybe to push towards negotiations if there are chances that arise. But I don't think that would be the top priority of the administration. Second, I think they would pursue a more conventional policy towards South Korea. They would try to rebuild the foundations of the alliance. And I think that's going to be a challenge given some of the issues that have come up over the last few years on cost sharing and other things. And then lastly, I think you would see the Biden team focus a lot more on Asia, which I think is a good thing, but largely focused on China. And we've already seen this come up in the election. We have President Trump talking a lot about China. We have Joe Biden talking a fair amount about China. But I think that would be the top issue for their Asia advisors, not necessarily throughout the whole term, but at least at the beginning. I think China is going to be the top issue for folks looking at Asia. So my take is, as I said, I think we're not going to hear a lot from the administration about Korea over the next few months. I don't think we'll hear much about it from Joe Biden. That doesn't mean that those two sides aren't working to come up with smart policies that they could put in place after the election. But I don't believe that Korea is going to be a major issue from here through November. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack. Next, Dr. Dan Twining, please.
Thanks. It's great to be back with my old friend Woo Jung-yap and with colleagues from the Sejong Institute and my American friends. So let me take things in a little different direction from Zach. I mean, I broadly agree with him, but I see an emerging consensus in Washington that cuts across Republican-Democratic lines around the centrality of great power competition, primarily with China, around the fact that America actually is quite well positioned to compete in a great power competition after maybe several decades of not having to do that so directly, because of its singular alliance system, because of its continuing economic leadership and the many other advantages the United States has. So the job for the next president and the next administration, whether it's a second Trump term or a Biden presidency, is going to be to put flesh on the bones of what does it mean to lead in the context of great power competition, particularly with China. And that is going to cut across a lot of domains that, of course, it did not, say, in the Cold War contest with the Soviet Union. Technology, economic statecraft. The Soviet campaign, in so many respects, was fundamentally ideological and military in its competitive impulses. And I'm not calling the US-China competition a Cold War. There is some old-fashioned thinking that I think Republicans and Democrats are thinking very clearly about updating for the 21st century around successfully running a great power competition. The United States does actually know how to do this, but the instruments this time are going to look different. They are going to require greater economic leadership, including on trade, including on technology arrangements to protect free world economies. They are going to need to include all sorts of non-military instruments. China has been building global power and influence, not primarily through military means, but through instruments like the Belt and Road, instruments like technology investment and also theft. So we in the United States and allied Asian democracies, as well as in Europe, are going to need to think quite creatively about the non-military dimensions of a great power competition. I see a lot of overlap between Republicans and Democrats on that. I think we're also going to have to think quite a lot about our own domestic competitiveness. One reason that China has become so competitive internationally is because domestically, of course, it's quite competitive. The export manufacturing base it has built, the platform it has served as for so many global supply chains, its vast internal internet market, even though it's firewalled off from the rest of the world. China has invested in all forms of soft and hard infrastructure as part of a strategy of also projecting itself globally. So I think there's going to need to be some fresh thinking by whoever comes next in the United States about America's domestic competitiveness, about investments we need to make. And finally, that includes renewing and refreshing democracy, which is something for both South Korea and America. That the great thing about democracy is that it's resilient, it's also self-correcting and can constantly update itself in a way that a brittle authoritarian one-party state, one-man system cannot. And so I think you'll see fresh thinking irrespective of who wins the next US election around making our democracy work better in order to enable a very strong foreign policy leadership.
Thanks, Dan. Now, Ambassador Yun, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wu. It's great to be with you and with all my American and Korean colleagues today. I think Zach really did answer a lot of questions on importance of Korean issues in US election. It is unfortunately not very important at all. And I would go a step further and say foreign policy in general are not important electoral issues in the United States. However, having said that, we are facing a crisis here, which is triggered by coronavirus. And so in that sense, leadership issues, such as has the leader been unifying? Has he brought together divided country, or has he been more polarizing? And those are important, as well as, of course, competency issues. So you're going to see time and again for Trump being compared with leaders who have done more successfully, who have dealt more successfully with coronavirus. I think in this case, South Korea is often mentioned in the United States as a very successful example, as well as other countries, even China, as well as Germany. So you're going to see that as a narrative going into election, comparing Trump with other leaders and whether he has crafted a solution that is a huge crisis for Americans. Talking specifically about Korean issues, of course, until I would say about a year ago, North Korea looked like a good issue for Trump. He was very proud of what he achieved. But really, again, as Zach mentioned, as time passes and North Koreans get increasingly angry with threatening behavior and with revelations such as Bolton's coming out, that's not a winning issue anymore for President Trump. But also I would point out, neither is this a winning issue for Biden. Biden has been long-time foreign policy hand. He was, of course, vice president in 8 years of Obama administration, and a lot of people are critical of Obama administration's management of North Korean issue. They believe that so-called strategic patience has done nothing but increase North Korean leverage. So really looking at from both Biden's side as well as Trump's side, it is better to stay quiet on North Korea issues. But after the election, you will likely see a flurry of activity. This is a threat. North Korea is a threat. That's not going away. In fact, over the past 3.5 years of Trump presidency, they have increased their both nuclear and missile capability. So it is a threat that's there, and you will have a debate. Now the style of Biden and Trump are fundamentally different. So let me say the differences in both style and in substance. In style, I think Trump is much more of the type, as we have seen, let me handle it, let me negotiate it, I can forge your way out. I think you will see Biden, he will be much more methodical. He will have much more process-oriented. So in that sense, I think you should see Biden as much more of a traditionalist. He belongs to a school I would call centrist liberal. He has much more sympathy and much more support for multilateral framework as well as alliance structure. So he will emphasize those in dealing with North Korean issues. So you can expect he will go through his issues. His team, who are also very experienced, will go through issues. They will form options. And once they decide options, I think there will be a flurry of diplomacy with countries, especially with South Korea, China, Russia, Japan, in UN and so on, to try to forge out a way out. Now, make no mistake, denuclearization is very, very important to them. But I think they've also learned the lesson over the last, many years that this is not going to happen immediately. So I expect to see more methodical process under Biden with denuclearization as the goal, but steps towards getting there. So in that sense, I think you will see diplomacy once again, not necessarily top-down summit diplomacy, but more working level diplomacy and hopefully leading to something. Now, if the Trump was to be reelected again, I think, again, he has a commitment. He wants to do something on North Korea. There is no reason to think that fire will die. So he will make an effort. But I'm not sure it will be as multilateral, with as much emphasis on how China can help us, how others can help us. I think it will be more unilateral in nature. So why don't I leave it there and hear some comments and from the others.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon, so much for your insights. And now I ask our Korean participants to make comments and questions to our U.S. colleagues. Why don't we start from Professor Park In-hee, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Woo, and thank you. Very excellent comments raised by American expert. Basically, I agree that, in many cases, normally the Korean issue, or in particular North Korean issue, never been placed on the top priority in the American presidential election. About that comment, I completely agree with you. But at the same time, we need to think about two different time space. From now on and until the time when you have the election, and then after the time period after the election, by saying that, as you know, North Korea clearly mentioned that they would do something sometime May and until the early June. They repeatedly mentioned that they would like to increase their kind of provocation, including military option. So even though North Korean issue never been highly placed in the American election, but if North Korea do something, there could be some kind of the meaningful response from the American side. So I would like to know that about what could be American response and option, after North Korea increase their own way of the provocation. And secondly, American expert, that recently President Moon Jae-in has a new appointment in the key positions such as director of the NIS, which is equivalent to the Korean CIA, and also we have new Minister of Unification. According to media coverage in Korea and also according to the interpretation of the Korean expert, President Moon's new appointment clearly says something about, he do something to definitely to have better inter-Korean relations. So in that case, as long as America continue the option of the sanction against North Korea, and as long as, the international society and community agree to such kind of the option of sanction approach to North Korea, how much do you think South Korean government has our kind of strategic autonomy? we continue very close partnership between U.S. and South Korea in terms of the handling North Korean issue. But for the last of the Moon Jae-in administration's term, the period, I think, and it seems to us that President Moon he do his best to achieve some kind of the meaningful achievement on his North Korean policy. In that condition, how much is South Korean government supposed to have a strategic space, okay, to approach North Korea. So I basically have two questions to the American expert, and if I have another chance, I'm going to add another comment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Park. So Ambassador Yoon, you want to go first to respond to Professor Park's comment questions?
Sure, I'll have a go. Professor Park always asks tough questions, So on the provocation side, I mean, my view is that there is really the red lines. Red lines for the US are either a nuclear test or an ICBM test. Medium range missile tests, it doesn't matter. My own belief is that, Kim Jong-un is watching US politics as much as anyone. In fact, they know way more about American politics than probably all of us. So he knows this is a close race, that he really does not want to, number one, make Trump angry. Because if he does cross that red line, Trump will become angry and he will react in a fairly dramatic fashion. And that's not in North Korea's interest. And so I really don't think you're going to see a major provocation before the election. That's my view. On the appointment side, to be honest with you, I think these appointments confirms for everyone what President Moon wants to do, which is to go full speed ahead with his North Korea policy. Now, is that a problem for the United States or not? Of course, it is a problem when there is fundamental disagreement. Right now, there is a fundamental agreement. That is, President Moon also values. In fact, his highest goal is also denuclearization. So he's committed not to open the relations with North Korea in any substantive degree until there is progress on denuclearization. Now, should he annul that platform of denuclearization, that's going to be a very big problem. But so far, I see no sign of that. And so I'm fairly confident alliance management can be sustained. And I don't see any fundamental departure with these appointments.
Okay, Zach, please.
Well, I agree with everything Ambassador Yoon said, of course. I might just add one point, which is I think if the Trump administration continues, if the president wins in November, I'm not sure that the president would want to focus so much on North Korea. I think he might come back to this cost sharing and burden sharing issue with South Korea as sort of the top issue on his mind on the peninsula. I think South Korean leaders have been smart in how they've handled this issue and hopefully gotten themselves time to get through the election before they have to strike a deal. But it just seems to me that this can't be avoided forever. And let me be clear, I don't support the president's approach on this. I think we should be taking a very different avenue towards dealing with our allies in Asia. But I think the president's been very clear for years and years about his desire to have a different cost-sharing arrangement. And I think that might be at the top of his agenda if he wins again in November.
Thank you. Now I ask Professor Jung Gu-yeon to make comments and ask questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I have two questions. So first one goes to, I guess, Dr. Dan Twining. I agree with your point about there is a bipartisan kind of consensus in Washington, D.C. about how United States should react to Chinese rise. And my concern is that both Republican as well as Democrat parties seems to be preparing for the kind of decoupling. In other way, the changing supply chains when it comes to like a 5G or other high technological kind of technology. So do you see any difference between Trump administration and Democrats about the scope and kind of a process of decoupling and how they will kind of unfold in the future? The second question is related to this question. So it seems like there is a number of discussions about Quad Plus. It seems to be pushed by India these days. So what's your reactions to this issue, and especially from the Democrats and Republican perspectives? Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, please.
Good, thank you. Great questions. So on Quad Plus, maybe to take that first, I think the Quad Plus grows out of a recognition that America's Asian alliances are necessary but not sufficient for this new strategic landscape that we're looking out at together with our allies. And there are countries that are not part of that, like India, which should be. And frankly, it's very important, the old hub and spokes network where the allies all dealt with America independently. That's a strategic liability now. And I think all members of the Quad Plus, including the United States, are much more interested in allied interoperability, intelligence sharing, joint exercises, but also going beyond that to joint planning and other joint arrangements to help secure a free and open Indo-Pacific. And that's a positive goal. That's not to contain China, that's not to keep anybody down. It's a positive goal of continuing to provide those public goods that have enabled Asia to prosper and become the world's developmental miracle over the past 2 generations. So I find that frankly very encouraging, and a lot of that Quad Plus dynamic, as you know, has been driven not by the United States, but by other countries wanting to make it stronger and more robust. And I think that's quite encouraging from the perspective of Asia-Pacific security. On decoupling, it's much more complicated than I think sometimes the politicians on both the right and the left make it sound. America is a big economy. We are much less exposed to trade as a percentage of GDP than a country like the Republic of Korea. So the American conversation is going to be very different. The COVID experience, we are all still in lockdown because China's authoritarian repression prevented doctors in China and media in China from telling the world the truth about the pandemic in December, January, February. So Americans actually understand now in ways that perhaps they did not before the risks of undue dependence on Chinese-based global supply chains, including for medical and pharmaceutical products. So the conversation in America may be different, I appreciate, than the conversation in many Asian countries. I do think there are very big opportunities for Korean companies, Samsung, others, when we think about building out kind of a free world technology infrastructure that is not based on Huawei or other Chinese companies that want to surveil our societies, that Korean technology, I think, could fill the gap for many countries and for many industries that do not want to be reliant on China. And finally, I'll just say, the interest in at least a mild form of decoupling from China is not simply Donald Trump, it's not simply this administration or Republicans. We hear it a lot from the private sector now, from Fortune 500 companies, that realize that they are excessively exposed and that there is undue commercial risk from their China supply chains. But of course, they will still be interested in access to that Chinese market if reciprocity were ever possible.
Thanks, Dan. I think Professor Chung Guyon might have other questions to Ambassador Yoon and Dr. Jack Cooper. Professor Chung?
For Ambassador Yoon, I have questions about American domestic situations. So you mentioned about a lot of frustration and concern across American societies during this COVID-19 situation. So I heard, and we all concerned about situation when it comes to racial protest and especially racial inequality. How do you think that will affect American elections in November this year?
I think the whole concept of racial justice, social justice, will be a tremendous driving factor in the elections. And I think this is true, both in terms of participation rate, election issues, and really, I think second only to coronavirus, this will be a driving factor. And, I think it cuts both ways. And I think people have to be smart about playing to this issue. I think we have seen, for example, President Trump over the last few days using these issues to re-energize his own base. And, that strategy certainly worked in 2016. But I do think it's not exactly the same situation as 2016 in the sense that, coronavirus has revealed, for example, that ethnic minority groups are far more susceptible to the virus than the whites, for example. So, and I think there's whole issues also related to justice issues, especially on law enforcement, on police violence, as well as history issues. How should Americans deal with history? Ranging from slavery issues to even, Asians, Japanese internment, and so on. So I think this is pretty much a time of transition in the United States. And certainly I feel that it is a time of transition. And I hope something good comes out at the end to make the society less polarized, less divided than it is now.
Dr. Jung, do you also have questions to Dr. Zach Cooper?
Yeah, I have another question too. Sorry for dominating entire discussion. So I have one question for Dr. Jack Cooper. You mentioned I like your way of describing Trump administration. First fire and fury, and now is kind of fire and kind of uninterested in North Korean issue. So when you look through this 3 or 4 years of Trump administration, what is the kind of factors that make Trump to backburner North Korean issue? And I think Dr. Dan and also Ambassador Joe Yoon also mentions about this issue. Do you think the learning curve of Trump administration has been kind of different from other administration, or is just kind of personality issue?
It's a great question, and I look forward to other thoughts on this from folks that, frankly, were probably a little closer to it than I was. My initial reaction is that I think President Trump was actually listening very closely to President Obama. You all remember that President Obama told President Trump that Korea was a really important issue. This was really one of the things that President Obama foot-stomped during the transition. And I was a bit involved in the transition, and I think that discussion was quite important for the president. So I think we have to give President Trump a little bit of credit here for listening to his predecessor and trying to take this issue seriously. Now, I think many of us at the same time were pretty skeptical about whether the path the president was going down was actually going to lead to results. But, I think there has been some learning that's gone on, both probably on the president's part and maybe on the part of his team more broadly. which has kind of led them back to this place, which frankly looks a lot more like strategic patience than I think we could have ever imagined they would be the first year or two of the administration. And I think that's because at the end of the day, the problems that we're facing with North Korea aren't easily solved. If they could have been easily solved, others probably would have done it. And it's just going to take this kind of continued effort and some opportunities that maybe we're not capable of creating, but are going to have to come upon North Korea, that are going to be forced upon North Korea by external events that we might not be able to control.
Thank you, Jack. Now I ask Professor Chung Sung-chul to make comments and ask questions.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to hear your thoughtful and great analysis. Actually, I have three questions, so anyone can answer this one. The first one is about the lesson from the 2017 and 2018. So I think it's good to review the Korean Peninsula. 2017, there was a crisis between the North Korea and US. So, and then 2018, there was a summit between the US and North Korea and South Korea and North Korea and China. So I think it's good to look back. So how was it? It was good. Why now we can go forward? So my first question is the lesson of the 2017 and 2018 for US side. So how do you think how US experts learn from the 2017 and 2018? So I'm not sure. I think the last 2 years can affect the next US administration's thinking about North Korea and its policies. So 2017 and 2018, what can be some variable for the next US president. And the second question is about the if Joe Biden is elected in this November, what is the new US president's demand for the South Korean government? So now we know that the Trump administration is talking about more burden sharing and also the common bond against China. So there will be some difference between the Trump and Biden about the U.S. policy towards South Korea. So I agree with Jack, Dr. Cooper, the Joe Biden will be more conventional and then put more emphasis on alliance. But what can be some difference between the Trump and Biden on the U.S. demanding for the South Korea? What will be the expectation of the Biden administration for South Korean government? So it's my second question. And the last question is about China. So I agree with Dr. Daniel, about that there is the emerging consensus in U.S. about China is challenging U.S. and its way of life. But my question is, there is a consensus on how to deal with China. So there can be some difference between the Republicans and Democrats. So, but now we see some trade dispute between U.S. and China, and also the Indo-Pacific strategy. But I'm not sure it can be a consensus on how to deal with China. But I want to ask you, there is some difference or some different views, different strategy on the U.S. Strategy toward China. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chung. And can I ask Dan to respond first for these questions from Professor Chung Sung-chul?
Yes, thank you. Maybe I'll just take the China question. Great questions. I don't think we fully know the answer. It feels to me that there's a lot of agreement, at the 100,000-foot level about the importance of China, but as you drill down, differences emerge. I mean, you also see that someone like Vice President Biden, in his career as a senator, he spent most of it dealing with a totally different China. The China, even that he dealt with as vice president under President Obama, is not the China of today. It's not the China that has taken over much of the South China Sea, the China that has crushed Hong Kong and the wonderful legal and independent institutions that have made Hong Kong what it was. It's not the same China that has essentially declared one-man rule with the suspension of term limits on the leader. And so even if Vice President Biden should win, he's going to be looking out at a very different country and a very different strategic landscape. And again, I think the challenge for the next administration is going to be, what is that toolkit of military, economic, diplomatic, technological, what is the right balance? And we will need to innovate, and we will need to innovate with our friends and allies. And frankly, I think the US-South Korean alliance is one of the most important pillars of international security, certainly in Asia. It's not directed against China, and it won't be directed against China. But a strong and healthy and vigorous US-ROK alliance is central to continuing peace and prosperity in Asia. And I think the next president will recognize that, even nodding to American popular interest in burden sharing. I mean, when you take that out to Americans, people say, well, of course our allies should share these burdens. And then I think we make the case, but the US-ROK alliance is actually a fine example of burden sharing already. And it's been highly successful. So let's invest in that and sustain what we know works.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Dr. Zach Cooper?
I couldn't agree with Dr. Twining's points anymore. I think the last one is incredibly important. Sometimes Americans like to tell ourselves that we're abroad, right? We have troops abroad because we're there to help our friends. But the reality is we're there because we have shared interests. And so we're there for ourselves too. And I think sometimes the American people hear what we say about how the US is so generous being abroad, and they've listened to that language and they've understood it, because sometimes we're not quite as open as we should be about the fact that, no, we're in Korea because it's in America's interest to be in Korea, right? That's why we're in Germany. That's why we're in Japan. It's not because we're nice, benevolent people, although we are, of course. It's because this is what's best for the United States. And I think it's important that we make that case. And I think, just to build on one thing that Dr. Twining said, is what we're seeing from both sides of the aisle, as he's pointing out, is I think a desire to draw Korea more into not just the regional security dynamics, but really the international dynamics, right? The Trump administration's move to push the D10, right? This grouping of leading democracies. I think that's been very positive, and I think that's the kind of direction that is going to be embraced by both Democrats and Republicans. And I will be honest, I was a little surprised to see it happen, but I think this idea of including Korea effectively into the G7 in this way I think it's good for Korea, I think it's good for the United States, and it helps us ensure that, when we talk about the shared interests that democracies have, that we're not just focused, as the United States too often is, on its democratic allies in Europe, but it's also focused on bringing in those democratic allies in Asia and elsewhere as well. So I actually think a lot of those trends, the big picture trends, are very much in the right direction. And they would be issues that I think a Biden administration would probably embrace if they won. And I think the Trump administration might continue if they won.
Thank you, Zach. Ambassador Yoon, please.
Thank you very much. Let me answer the North Korea question and move on a little bit about the regional issues. I take two lessons from the experience of 2017 and 2018 and where we are now. Number one is that we're not going to be successful under the current framework of denuclearizing North Korea. North Korea is not going to give up nuclear weapons. Why would they? This is something they've had since 2006. Their nuclear programs has been in existence since they've been working on it since late 80s. And we've had 2-3 decades of trying to denuclearize them. And Of course, we're not going to denuclearize them if we continue to insist to give up everything and we'll give you everything. That's not going to work. So that has to be the cold assessment that we cannot denuclearize North Korea. My second assessment is US cannot denuclearize North Korea alone. This is a task way too big. It was even too big when the US was the sole superpower. It's certainly too much for us now. We have to recognize the erosion of the United States that's taken place over the next decade, past decade and a half. We cannot denuclearize North Korea alone. And so what does it mean then? We need partners. We have no leverage over North Korea. We have no trade. We don't give them anything. We have no communications. We don't know what's going on there. We need to rely much more on South Korea, on China, and on others. And without that, it's not going to be possible to denuclearize North Korea. Second thing is if the Americans manage our foreign policy by asking countries like China or, others, say, choose between Beijing and Washington, that is a failure. We cannot ask countries to choose between China and United States. That's not going to work. And this kind of thinking that somehow we can force everyone to form an anti-China bloc, it's not going to work. It's not even going to work with South Korea, let alone European countries, Southeast Asian countries. So it's too late for that. And so we need to be much more smart. We need to use our leverage a lot better, and asking countries to choose, those days are gone.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Yoon. And I'll ask questions based on Ambassador Yoon's assessment that we know that it's not an easy task for international community to denuclearize North Korea, but if we explicitly mention that denuclearization goal of engaging with North Korea from the point of view of the United States. So how is it going to be played if less than denuclearization is going to be set as a goal of engaging with North Korea? So can you go first, Ambassador Yoon?
Well, now you're asking for solutions. That's even tougher. Listen, I have always believed that we cannot accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, okay? So there is obviously diplomacy in how you do that, because they're not going to give up nuclear weapons. We're not going to recognize them as a nuclear weapon state. So how do you fill that in-between gap? So I think the first step has to be what I call threat reduction. Your initial step, the initial steps are all very obvious. It's a freeze. So what's going to buy a freeze? You have to ask that question, And Bolton's book made it clear what we've known for a while. That is, in Hanoi, there could have been a deal. U.S. side was willing to negotiate Yongbyon for a small amount of sanctions. But North Korea was incapable of negotiating there. They flatly refused it. So I do think North Koreans in Hanoi passed a great opportunity to make the first step. Why they passed that opportunity? For quite frankly, I don't know. According to some accounts I've heard, that President Moon said this is enough for them, and I don't know whether that's true. But it's, start is everything. And then building a process after the start is everything. So there is no magic formula. They've had nuclear weapons since 2006. That's what, 15 years ago? It's going to take even longer than that to reach complete denuclearization. So I just wish that the politicians don't believe somehow this is a magic goal, that during their term in office, they can do this, because that's a recipe for failure.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon. Dan, please.
So the US really wants to focus on great power competition. And then I think the question is, how does the ROK and the crisis on the Korean Peninsula fit into that? I'm quite interested in China's new look, which is so much more aggressive. What they did in Hong Kong was very bold and very dangerous. And our friends in Taiwan are now worried that Xi Jinping is actually serious about using force to reunite the motherland, partly because when he bumps up against that 10-year limit that other Chinese leaders would have been subjected to, he is going to need to have something to show for it. So I think there is some thinking for both Americans and our Korean allies to do about the Chinese role on the Korean Peninsula. And, you know, traditionally we have seen Beijing as a source of restraint for Pyongyang's adventurism. But is there a scenario in which the Chinese leadership might actually wink at some kind of North Korean provocation, a serious one that crosses red lines, over the next few years as part of a Chinese strategy of retaking Taiwan? So I don't want to take us too far off subject, but I think, you know, I was in the Bush administration, we tried the six-party talks, President Obama tried strategic patience, President Trump tried direct diplomacy. All those things have been tried and failed. Three very different approaches. Ambassador Yoon's been at the center of all three of them. And so what else, what other cards do we have to play? And I think the wild card, frankly, may be China, and I'm worried about it.
Okay, Zach, please.
I would just add very briefly, I think all of this points to me to the likelihood that you're going to see an administration try and just sort of hold in the Korean Peninsula and avoid hoping that it's going to get a real deal, because just as Dr. Twining said, you know, we've seen people try everything and none of it seems to have worked. And so I think you end up probably going back to a strategy of just trying to contain and deter the Kim regime and, you know, wait it out. Obviously, waiting it out has taken quite a long time already. But I don't see a lot of other great options. You know, I think one of the challenges for this administration is they came in being told that it was probably no longer possible to contain North Korea. So they kind of gave up on the containment part early on, right? But, you know, I think most people that have dealt with the regime come back and say, well, you know, they actually do operate much the same way that we think most people operate, although with a different logic to how the regime internally, how the internal regime dynamics work. But, you know, it is possible, therefore, to deter Kim Jong-un. And so I think we'll see an administration likely come back, whether it's Biden or Trump, and re-embrace that basic approach of just containing and deterring until something changes.
Professor Park, you said that you want to make a comments later. So could you do that, please?
Thank you for giving me a chance. I have a very simple and technical question. Either, you know, any American expert. Deputy Secretary Stephen Biegun is here right now in Seoul. He arrived in Seoul last night. And according to the media coverage, there is no chance. It seems to me there is no chance to contact between the Biegun and someone from North Korea. But at the same time, continuously President Trump over and over emphasized that because of his leadership, because of his decision, he eliminated a North Korean threat coming to United States, right? It is the meaningful achievement by Trump. Even though I know there's a, you have a Republican convention sometime next month, and after the convention, there's no time between, October and November, but at the same August and November. At the same time, do you think there's any chance to do another meeting between U.S. and North Korea? Could be kind of summit or whatever the level of the meeting, but do you think any possible chance of a symbolic figures between the two countries after Biegun leave Seoul?
Can I ask Ambassador Yoon to respond to this question?
Thank you. I know Steve Biegun well. He's a very capable guy. And he's, of course, his job is to negotiate. And, when negotiators don't negotiate, they're just sitting on their hands, and it's very frustrating. I'm certain, when Steve decided to take this trip, he would have really liked to meet with North Koreans to discuss where the situation is. Can anything be salvaged by, 2-3 years of very intensive diplomacy? And he's made it clear very publicly that he's willing to meet with North Korean counterparts anytime, any place. So I think he was hopeful. But North Korea has made it clear they're not going to meet at any other level than Trump. And that is because of the inherent difference in views between Trump and then anyone below him in the administration. I think in anyone below him, you've seen it from Bolton, you've seen it from Pompeo and others. They really truly believe that denuclearization has to come first before there is any relief in sanctions. That's a non-starter for North Koreans. So they're saying, listen, forget about it. We're going to build leverage in the meanwhile, and then go on from there. Now, of course, as Zach mentioned, I think, Biden administration or whoever is next would like to ignore this problem. But North Koreans don't make it easy to ignore the problem because they want to be in middle of action. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. And once your attention drifts away, they will make sure the attention comes back. And so even though you want it to go away quietly, North Koreans make it very, very difficult to do that.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon. And I really appreciate that your insight exchanges this time. I appreciate our American colleagues' late evening participation and also our Korean colleagues' very early morning participation in this virtual conference. And I hope you will stay safe and meet in person very soon. Thank you, and this concludes our meeting today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.